T.S. Eliot was born in St. Louis, Missouri, to a prominent Boston Brahmin family. He moved to England in 1914 and went on to settle, work, and marry there. He became a British subject in 1927, subsequently renouncing his American citizenship. Eliot won the Nobel Prize in Literature in the year 1948. In this video, we'll be discussing some of Eliot's contributions as a literary critic.
ഞാനിതിനൊക്കെ പടക്കുറുപ്പന്മാരുടെ ഫാമിലിയാ. ഞങ്ങളുടെ രക്തമെന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ക്ഷത്രിയ രക്തമാ. അങ്ങനെ പറഞ്ഞു കൊടുക്കണം രമണ.
Tradition and the individual talent. This is one of the more well-known works that Eliot produced in his critic capacity. In the essay, Eliot discusses the relationship between the poet and the preceding literary traditions. First published in the year 1919 in the literary magazine The Egoist, this essay is divided into three parts. First, the concept of tradition is discussed, then the theory of impersonal poetry, and finally the conclusion. We can analyze this essay by asking a few questions. First question, what is the role of tradition according to Eliot? In the essay, Eliot is defending the role of tradition in helping new writers to be modern. Eliot is of the opinion that the act of artistic creation does not take place in a vacuum. Eliot believes that in order to move forward, the poet has to look to the past. The poet must have a historical sense of his position among a great sequence of writers who wrote before him, and also of his position in the current time period. This is an awareness and understanding of the relationship between his poetry with that of the poets in the tradition. This is what makes a writer traditional. Should the poet copy the past as a part of tradition? No. According to Eliot, tradition is not a mindless imitation of the past. Loyalty to tradition should not be at the cost of sacrificing the individuality. The originality or novelty is possible only through tapping into tradition. What do you mean by the term impersonal theory of poetry? Or the artistic creation is a process of depersonalization. How is that? According to Eliot, the poet understands that he is part of this order of poets, the order of tradition, and does not exist separately. Hence, the artistic creation is a process of depersonalization. Eliot compares the poet to a catalyst. Why? In a chemical reaction, the catalyst is the component that facilitates the chemical reaction, but does not undergo any change to its own form. The poet is the same. The poet does not express his emotions, but acts as a depersonalized vessel, a mere medium to channel the ordinary feelings and emotions he has observed through his poetry. Eliot tells that great works do not express the personal emotions of the poet. This is what Eliot intends when he discusses poetry as an escape from emotion. It is an act of depersonalization. Since successful poetry is impersonal and therefore exists independent of its poet, it outlives the poet and can incorporate into the timeless ideal order of the literary tradition. What is talent according to Eliot? Talent is not something to be inherited, but obtained through great labor. Talent of the poet, Eliot says, is defined by how well he writes a poem through diligent study of the literature and history written before him, and being aware of the tradition to which he belongs.
ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞിട്ടുണ്ട് ഗിയർ മാറുമ്പോൾ ക്ലച്ച് അമർത്തണം. അപ്പൊ ആക്സിലേറ്ററോ അത് പിന്നല്ലേ.
ഈ നടുവിലുള്ളതാണോ ക്ലച്ച്? എത്ര പ്രാവശ്യം നമ്മൾ ഇതിന് താഴോട്ട് നോക്കരുതെന്ന്? പിന്നെ ക്ലച്ച് ആണെന്ന് അറിയണ്ടേ? ക്ലച്ചിന്റെ കാലിൽ ലെഫ്റ്റാണ് ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞില്ലേ? ഓ അത് ശരി. അപ്പൊ ക്ലച്ച് ഇടുമ്പോ ഗിയർ അമർത്തണം അല്ലേ? ഒന്നാം ഘട്ട
Dissociation of sensibility. This is a literary term first used by T.S. Eliot in his essay The Metaphysical Poets, which was published in the year 1921. It refers to the change in the style of writing that happened after the age of metaphysical poets. What was the change? Eliot believed that the metaphysical poets like John Donne were able to unify thought and the sensation of feeling. However, according to Eliot, the poets who came later, especially Dryden and Milton, were not able to achieve this effect. Hence, intellectual thought was separated from the experience of feeling in the 17th century poetry. Eliot does not regard Alfred Lord Tennyson or Robert Browning as great poets. According to Eliot, they have ideas, but they fail to transmit their ideas into emotions and sensations. Merely dry thoughts or logic do not make a great poet, says Eliot. Tennyson and Browning are poets, and they think, but they do not feel their thought as immediately as the odor of a rose, Eliot says. So, what's the problem with this? What if you don't unify thought and feeling or thought and sensation? What is the problem? According to Eliot, the dissociation of sensibility is a linguistic and cultural condition from which English literature and society have never recovered. Oh my God. He believes the dissociation of sensibility to be a hindrance in the progression of poetry. The critic, Alan Austin, asserts that Eliot defines this term in order to provide a rationale for the combination of wit and emotion. He blames that Eliot's appreciation of thought united with emotion is also a method of defending his own poetry. We will now look at a term first coined by Washington Allston but popularized by T.S. Eliot, objective correlative.
അന്നത്തെ സംഭവങ്ങൾ മുഴുവൻ ഡിറ്റക്റ്റീവ് അരുണാചലൻ തന്റെ ഡയറിയിൽ കുറിച്ചു വെച്ചു. ഗ്രാമം ഉറങ്ങിയിട്ടുണ്ടായിരുന്നില്ല. മുറിക്ക് പുറത്തെ കട്ട പിടിച്ച ഇരുട്ടിൽ ദൂരെയെങ്കിലും ഒരു ചാവാലിപ്പട്ടിയുടെ ഓലി കേട്ടു. പ്രകൃതിയുടെ ഒരു ഇല പോലും അനങ്ങിയില്ല. കാറ്റേതോ നിഗൂഢതയിൽ ഒളിച്ച പോലെ അന്തരീക്ഷത്തിൽ പഴകിയ ചോരയുടെ മണം തളം കെട്ടി നിൽക്കുന്നതായി അരുണാചലത്തിന് തോന്നി. ഡയറി അടച്ചു വെച്ച് ഉള്ളിൽ കെട്ടുപിടിഞ്ഞു കിടക്കുന്ന ചിന്തയുടെ കുരുക്കൾ അയക്കാൻ തുടങ്ങിയായിരുന്നു അയാൾ. ഒടുങ്ങനെ നിങ്ങളായിരുന്നോ?
പേടി കാണുമെന്നറിയാമായിരുന്നു. അതിന്റെ അളവ് പരിശോധിക്കുകയായിരുന്നു ഞാൻ. വളരെ കൂടുതലാണ്.
ഓ, രാത്രി ഡിറ്റക്റ്റീവ് നോവൽ വായിക്കുമ്പോ ഇങ്ങനെ പേടിപ്പിച്ച് ആരായാലും പേടിച്ചു പോയില്ലേ?
ശരി.
The term objective correlative was used by T.S. Eliot in his essay Hamlet and His Problems to refer to his theory of artistic mechanism whereby emotion is evoked in the audience. The only way of expressing emotion in the form of art is by finding an objective correlative, says Eliot. In other words, he adds, a set of objects, a situation, a chain of events which shall be the formula of that particular emotion, such that when the external facts which must terminate in sensory experience are given, the emotion is immediately evoked. This notion concedes that a poem means what it says, but suggests that there can be a non-subjective judgment based on the reader's interpretations. What does it mean? Say, for example, you're watching a horror film or you're reading a detective fiction. Let's stick to the horror film. The arrival of a ghost in the cliched manner is suggested by the sound of footsteps, chum, chum, thunder and lightning, cry of a cat, a wolf, heavy wind. Immediately our mind would suggest something bad is going to happen. The feeling of horror is generated in the mind of the audience. A set of objects, a sequence of events can in this manner provoke such a response from the reader. By analyzing such sequences, the critic can evaluate how well the author has communicated the desired emotions in the reader. Eliot said that if the objective correlative or this arrangement was not good enough to elicit the response from the reader, then the author had failed. Now, what did Eliot do with this theory? He applied it to Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet. Eliot's critic gained attention partly due to his claim that Hamlet is most certainly an artistic failure. Now, this was as equivalent to launching an atom bomb, saying that Hamlet is a failure. Now, why did he say this? He said this because it did not fit well with his theory of the objective correlative. Eliot believes that Hamlet's delay in exacting revenge is left unexplained by Shakespeare. He also writes that Shakespeare could not find a sufficient objective correlative, means a sequence of events, for his hero's distressed state of mind. And so the audience is left without a means to understand an experience that Shakespeare himself does not seem to understand. With this, we wind up our discussion on T.S. Eliot's contributions to literary criticism. And now we quickly look at some basic differences between Russian formalism and new criticism. In Russian formalism, a differentiation is made between form and content, whereas new criticism does not make such a differentiation, maintaining that texts are unified through their patterns, literary devices, themes, etc. Russian formalism also affords some importance to the text's language and structure, whereas new criticism considers a text to be completely self-contained and autonomous. Russian formalists focused on form as innovation, and American new critics focused on form as tradition. Now, both the schools were criticized for ignoring the historical and sociological components that influenced both the writing and the reception of the literature, not just because it seemed politically irresponsible, but because subjective interpretation is part of any active reading, even one by a critic himself or herself. Nevertheless, new criticism and its methods added vigor to the explication of a text, which forced the critics who came later to pay close attention to the words on the page. Next class, we will look at structuralism. Chaco!